Welcome to this week's episode of the Prep Athletics Podcast. I'm proud to have joining us Dr. Jeff Quebec. Now, Jeff Quebec has been doing work in the educational consulting space, and he also has been in the prep school admission world for a long, long time. He was at Eagle Brook for a long time, which is a junior boarding school across from Deerfield Academy. Then he worked at McDuffie School. He worked at Cushing Academy. He worked at Katz Academy. And now he's on his own as an educational consultant. He has been helping hockey players get into prep school for 32 years with an event he has called Pre-Prep. And we ask him a lot of questions that we don't usually talk about on this podcast. So we ask about behind the scenes of the admission network, how to do interviews, what to wear on campus, why visiting is so important, and so much more. So really good podcast. I learned a lot from it. Get your pen out to get ready to take some notes. And I think you'll enjoy this one. If you like this podcast, do me a favor, right? We put it on for free. We don't have any ads. Share it with somebody. Share it with someone out there that you think will enjoy this or might like it or might want to learn more about the prep school world. And that would really help us out a lot. We appreciate that. And now for a podcast with Dr. Jeff Quebec here in the Prep Athletics Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Prep Athletics Podcast. This is Corey Heights.
Some battles. I'm not sure if they got us. If they did, maybe.
So you will get better as a player during that year.
So it was kind of exciting. Like, oh yeah, somebody wants me.
Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. We've known each other for some years now, and you being in the admission world, I would love to just pick your brain on some of the stuff that a lot of our families ask, and I think that families need to know. But to start it off, what got you into the prep school world to begin with?
Yeah, great question. So I think, first of all, I always like to say is I'm a proud product of public school. Having graduated from public school, I thought I had a great education, but certainly I think as a lot of us know that unfortunately public school isn't always what it used to be back then. It's changed a lot. And so my sister and I went to public school, and my younger brother went to independent boarding school. He went to actually Deerfield Academy. And that was really my first exposure learning about it. I knew about independent schools growing up outside of Boston, but more so on the day school side of it, not to say the boarding side of things. And so I used to go visit my brother at school. And during that time, a lot of the dorm parents were close to age. We're very similar age. I used to come visit him. And at night, I'd find myself, the kids were going down for bed. I'd be hanging out and speaking with the dorm parents and kind of picking their brains. What's this all about? This triple threat concept, teacher, coach, dorm parent. I became really intrigued by it.
How come your brother went to prep school when you and your sister didn't? What was the logic on that?
Yeah, great question. And certainly there were a lot of questions being asked at the time, especially among my parents, like, is something wrong with your marriage? Something wrong with your child? Like, your other two kids are fine. Why is he going to boarding school? And it was an athletic decision. And while certainly it was important not to be sacrificing academics, it was driven really through ice hockey. And it was an opportunity to not only compete at a higher level, but also gain more exposure. And so that really ended up being a great opportunity, not only getting a quality education, but also leading to Division I scholarship offers. And my brother went on to play at Boston University.
Oh, perfect. Great story. And in your opinion, what makes prep school so special?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, actually. So I've been fortunate enough to have had decades of experience working in independent schools. And then also my doctoral dissertation is on the values and benefits of independent boarding school. So I've spent a lot of time doing studies on it, Corey. And the unfortunate thing is there's not a lot of research that has been done on boarding schools.
Right.
And you and I know boarding schools. We know the strengths of it, but certainly a lot of people out there don't necessarily know about boarding schools, or what they know is through having read books like Harry Potter or watching a movie like School Ties. And it's what sells in Hollywood, and it's not always pretty. But certainly today, that's far from the truth of what the benefits and the strengths of boarding schools are. And I always like to start off on the personalized side of things. And first and foremost, there's no hiding in the back of the classroom at prep schools. So that these teachers, coaches, administrators, dorm parents, they know you, and they'll know your child really well. And the relationships that you're formed are often lifetime relationships. And I think when you ask a lot of people maybe that went to public school about the relationships they may have with, say, their English teacher or their science teacher, more often than not, they're going to say, I don't. It doesn't exist. And not to say they didn't have a good experience, the teacher wasn't a good teacher. That's not what I'm saying. But I think these relationships often become lifelong relationships. And that's not even speaking about the students that they meet, interact with from not only all over the US, but all over the world.
Right. No, that's special. Definitely the cultural and the small classroom sizes, teachers living on campus,
Yeah.
all that. Now, you specifically, you've been working with hockey players for a long time, helping them get into prep schools, and you've also got a showcase called the Pre-Prep Showcase. How'd you get into the hockey
Yeah.
game of helping families get into prep school?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning that. So I own a company called the Pre-Prep Showcase, which this year is my 32nd year doing it. And it affords boys and girls the opportunity to get exposure to independent schools throughout the United States and Canada. This past year, we had student athletes from 34 different states and provinces. So we definitely are getting kids from all over. And so I was coaching. My first job out of school, I was working at Eagle Brook School in Deerfield, Mass. I was the head varsity hockey coach there. And there's certainly, especially if you're making a junior boarding school, there's an opportunity where these student athletes are looking to move to the secondary school level and a chance to get exposure. So it always takes place on the first Thursday of August every year. And as I mentioned, students come from all over, and the coaches behind the benches are all prep school coaches. And it's not only playing ice hockey games, but also seminars and speakers and a luncheon, a school fair. So there's a lot going on. And I would argue that what takes place off the ice is equally as important as the games and the practices that take place on the ice.
Gotcha. And then, like, is there a percentage of like kids that go from that to actual prep schools, or what's your statistics over the year on something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think there's a high, number, but I don't necessarily track it in the sense that I don't post anything on my website or I don't publicize what it is. But over the years, it's great. And what's for me quite rewarding is hearing the stories from the students themselves or the parents, and especially sometimes even years later, where they come back. And now it's fun where we're seeing children that are participating who their parents played when they were younger.
Right.
So it's
You
pretty
told
cool.
me that. That's crazy. That is
Yeah.
crazy. If you could give one piece of advice to athletes that are actually considering prep school, what would that be?
I would say first and foremost, make academics your number one priority. I think that's most important. So at the end of the day, when you think about, I understand as a young adolescent, you may aspire to continue and play your sport at the collegiately or even professionally, and that's awesome. And I think you should continue. There's nothing wrong with that. And I do think if the time comes where maybe it's not going to work out, make sure you're the one making the decision, not someone who's speaking down at you or saying, oh, you're not good enough, you're not talented enough, especially if you're really highly driven and motivated. Keep on working, try to reach your goals. But at the end of the day, make sure you're not doing it at the expense of sacrificing your academics. Because even if you make it to that level, and you're quite successful, you still got to have some smarts and some brains up there to know how to manage your life and your money.
Right. Right. And then on the hockey side too, there are more hockey focused academies that don't focus as much on academics as prep schools. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's correct. So what I would say to parents, I think that there's a right fit for everyone. And what's the right fit for one boy or girl doesn't mean it's right for your son or daughter. It's a matter of finding what that right fit is. But certainly there's academies out there. There's independent day schools, there's boarding schools. And just here in North America, throughout US and Canada, there's so many unbelievable opportunities. And also within hockey, there's the world of junior hockey. And that's a whole other world in itself. But
Yeah,
there's a
we'll
lot of
do
great
that.
opportunities.
We'll do the whole hockey, junior hockey, and all that on some other podcast. We focus on basketball here. It's confusing enough, let alone with the junior hockey stuff. But you mentioned your first job was at Eagle Brook, and I know you were there for quite a few years. I had the chance to visit there last fall, and I went through New England, and it was my first foray into the junior boarding school world. But that's something a lot of families out there have no idea it even exists or what the benefits are. So can you give us like an overview of like, who's junior boarding school for? Like, is it for American kids? Is it for international kids? Is there a certain type that it makes sense for?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 11 junior boarding schools in the country. And these 11 junior boarding schools, 10 of them are in New England, one's in New York, and they're outstanding institutions. And what they do is they afford younger adolescents, and sometimes they have a day component that may start as early as pre-kindergarten or kindergarten. And often the boarding at some of the schools starts somewhere between fourth, fifth, or sixth, depending on the school. And they go through ninth grade. And so then these students are really continuing to grow and develop as students, as young adolescents, and they're getting involved in many different activities, and they're preparing for the next level, which is often going on to a secondary high school. And during that time, they're really working on a lot of skills, and they come from all different backgrounds. Let's be honest: when you and I were in fourth grade, we didn't have the crystal ball what our future is, or we might have had gaps or areas we need to work on, and then end up being our strengths by the time we applied to college universities. And so I think the junior boarding schools do a phenomenal job of preparing these students for that next level. And I believe the secondary schools really recognize that. And so the secondary schools, whether it be their admissions office or even athletic coaches, they're actively seeking these students or recruiting them because they know that they've been away from home, that they've adjusted. and they know what those grades on the report card actually mean. And that's something that's often underestimated on the academic side is that, especially post-COVID, where there's definitely been grade inflation in this country. We're seeing a lot of report cards that look really impressive. Well, say you get a B in algebra from one school to the next, that B is not the same, or even from one teacher to the next, it's not the same. So I think that the secondary schools understand and appreciate what those grades actually mean when they come from one of these 11 junior boarding schools.
But you being at Eagle Brook so long, like what were those conversations? Like the fourth grade family, the parents of a fourth grader in California or overseas that want to send their kid off to a junior boarding school.
Yep.
Do the families know that they want to try to get them into a higher level secondary school? Like what's kind of the conversations you see? The kid, is it that the families want to jet set and they want to get rid of the kid? Like, what are some of the scenarios on this?
So in the case of Eagle Brook's grades 6 through 9. So it's boarding and day. And the students come from not only all over the U.S., but all over the world. And so I would say, as far as, the reference you made, as far as parents want to get their kids away, that is definitely not the case. Because out of the perfect scenario, who would argue the best scenario would be for any child at any age to be home, be in that environment? But unfortunately, that's not always the best environment. And that's not a knock on the parents, but it's just the reality is that at the home front, it's very difficult to offer the unbelievable opportunities that these schools, whether it's a junior boarding school or a secondary school, can offer. And so for whether you're a domestic student here in the States or you're coming from abroad, these opportunities are unbelievable. And so I think for most of the parents, they want their child to continue to grow, develop, and then have opportunities. And especially if you are a fifth grader, say, and you do enter as a sixth grader, who knows what that is? Now, there's not to say that parents don't have aspirations or the child does have aspirations, but a lot's going to change, as you know, during those middle school years. So I don't think there are parents that might be, just like in society, might be more high pressure than others. But I think for the most part, the parents just want what's best for their child. And they see that opportunity as like, wow. And they want to give them that opportunity. And so,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, so these schools just do a phenomenal job. And I just saw over the years, so many students are coming to Eagle Brook and the growth they had and the opportunity, it's amazing.
And stereotypically, junior high is a rough time for a lot of kids throughout.
Absolutely.
From the 70s, 80s, 90s to the current day. Is it better at a junior boarding school? Like, do some of those challenges that normal junior high kids might face, are those alleviated at junior boarding school? Or is it because everyone's so involved, like you said earlier, some of that stuff maybe doesn't happen there?
I think a couple things. One is I think that the schools do a good job of creating structured environments, right? So think about teenage boys and girls. If you give them too much downtime, sometimes that can be a little scary. So you're keeping them busy, you're keeping them structured, you're challenging them. That's important. And also that, as I mentioned earlier, the faculty, the staff, the teachers, the coach, administrators, they know the students and the students know them. And so it's relationships. And I think the biggest thing, I think for an adolescent boy is you're in or girl, I happen to say boy because Eagle Brook's all boys, is that it's a really nurturing environment. So not only is it really structured, but it's really nurturing. And these are men and women who really care about the development of the children.
Okay, and you mentioned Eagle Brook goes to ninth grade. I'm assuming the ninth graders, when they go off to secondary school, they reclass and do ninth grade year again, or do some go straight into 10th grade from ninth?
Yeah, it's a great question. So while there's always different scenarios for different people, but I think for the most part, if there is a reclassing going on, a lot of times the students may reclass when they enter the junior boarding school coming in. So while there are some students who may reclass going out to secondary school, more often than not, they reclass before they've arrived to the junior boarding school.
Okay. And I'm a ninth grader at Eagle Brook. Are secondary schools recruiting me? Is there like a secondary school placement office at Eagle Brook that helps me like figure out which ones are good fits for me? Do families hire educational consultants like yourself? Like, how does the placement of a junior boarding school work?
It's both. Yeah. So the junior boarding schools have directors of secondary school counseling who work with the students and the families to help guide them, advise them. And they would usually, there's going to be a couple of people in the office, men or women, who are going to help, and they're going to divide sort of the class up among each one of them, and then also working with the student and the parents. And there's certainly parents who will then also hire educational consultants like myself to work a little closer with their student, a little more attention. So I work, as you mentioned, about doing the pre-prep showcase, but as an educational consultant, I work with students from all different backgrounds, not just athletes, but students from not only domestically, but internationally, from all over, who are really looking for that guidance, whether they're looking to apply to a junior boarding school or a secondary school. And similarly, you'll have junior boarding school parents who would then continue that process. Like currently right now, I'm working with junior boarding school students who are looking to make that jump to secondary schools.
Interesting. And if I'm a family that knows nothing about the junior boarding school world, but I know I want to send my child there, hiring an educational consultant like yourself who knows the intricacies of all these 11 junior boarding schools, that's probably a good place for me to start then, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're not going to go wrong right with any one of the 11 junior boarding schools because they're unbelievable. But certainly it's about finding that right fit. And sometimes that right fit does come down to that gut instinct feel that a child or a parent has. But where do you start? Because you're probably not going to go visit all 11 and go tour or interview at all 11.
Yeah. So obviously what we do at Prep Athletics, we help basketball players from around the world, Jeff, find the right fitting prep schools. And you are our first educational consultant / former admission director who's been on the podcast here. So walk me and our listeners through what educational consultants do for the prep school world and for your clients.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Corey. So I think a couple of things. One is I think a really good educational consultant spends a lot of time to get to know the child. And that's through the lens of the parents or the guardians, through the lens of the child themselves, getting to know the child and spend time with them, and also through their past academic history, their report cards, transcripts, any testing they may have, whether it be standardized testing, psychological evaluations, et cetera. And really take all that information and do a deep dive. And at that point, to come up and formulate a list of, these are some schools that I think may be a good fit for this child. And then sort of go back to the family, share that, and answer a lot of questions that the family may have or the student may have about the school. And then it's an introductory phase. It's an opportunity for myself as an educational consultant to introduce the school to the student and the family and vice versa. And that also may include program heads. In the case of your situation referencing basketball players, it might be a really talented basketball player. And of course, you want to have the head of the basketball program or the head coach involved in the process to know that, wow, this person's looking at my school, not finding out later on, but rather they want to be involved, especially if it's someone that's going to be recruited for their athletic talents. And that could be not only in athletics, but also in the arts, other different program heads through different extracurricular opportunities at the school. And then throughout that process, certainly one of the biggest goals is to get them on campus, right? Because it's not about who's got the pretty pictures on the website or who has great taglines. You got to go there and you got to go check out the schools. And schools want that. They want to see. And it's also a commitment on your part, showing that you're really committed and you're invested, that you're really interested in their school. And so there's guidance that goes on as far as the interview process. Think about if you and I were to go interview some adults, that could be an intimidating experience. Never mind some young child who's going for the first time, or whether it be junior high or high school age kid who's being grilled by an adult with some questions and and having to answer them. And then so with that, I think there's a lot of little tricks of the trade as far as communication and follow up and such. Then there's an application process, and that's essays and answering a lot of questions. Essentially putting kind of together your brag sheet or your resume. And then behind the scenes, there's a lot of advocacy. And through that, it's going to be not only my knowledge of the schools, but also relationships I have. So relationships that I have with these admissions officers and these coaches or other people at the school, and really going to bat, but also going to bat and putting my reputation in the line where I really do believe that, Corey is a good fit for your school. This is why Corey would be a great fit, and why I think that you should accept Corey. And I always tell parents, well, I don't make any promises or guarantees. My goal is that come decision day, I want there to be options, right? So if you apply to a handful of schools, you don't want to only get accepted to one and have a bunch of rejections or wait lists, but rather have some choices. And similar if you're applying to college university, we used to joke when we were younger, it's sort of the thick or thin, right? When you got the envelope, you wanted to get those thick envelopes, the big packages, and versus the one single envelope, a piece of paper that said a rejection letter. And that's the goal. And then during that process, a lot changes because these students continue to mature and grow and develop throughout the time, where what they thought they may have wanted back in the fall might be different come decision time. And so usually generally around, depending on the school, if it's on a traditional deadline system, March 10th, they find out and they have till April 10th. And these schools will do second visits. And I've absolutely seen students who maybe in their own mind have ranked the schools of where they'd like to go. And a school that may be further down the ranking and that they've been accepted to after a second visit. And they're looking at it from a different lens now, because no, you don't have the stress or anxiety. They're not nervous because they can now see themselves like, oh, hey, this is how I may or may not fit in, or these would be my people. Like this is what I'd be hanging out with or going to classes with or playing, in this case, basketball with. And then they make these decisions. And I have seen students that would maybe choose what would be in their mind their third choice school, even though they all got into their top three. And that's the wonderful thing about these schools is that there's just so many amazing opportunities.
I know. Sometimes my clients get, that March 10th, emails come and they have these three schools they're going to get in and they're having a hard time choosing. I'd have a hard time choosing. Like,
Exactly.
Three great options. And I tell families, it's like you have an Audi, a Mercedes, and a BMW. Like you cannot go wrong with any of these.
Totally.
It's just which one do you want to put your butt in for the ride?
Well, that's the gut instinct, right? That's the feel you have, or the gut instinct at that point. where maybe you can't describe it or put it in writing or put it on paper, but you're saying, you know what, for some reason, I just think this is the one.
Yeah. And that's what we work on with our clients. If they're torn between schools, I've got a couple of exercises I put them through to find out what the gut's really saying.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
It's deep in there, but they know.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's just a matter of dragging it out. And sometimes, too, not paying attention to the outside distractions.
Exactly. Now, I'm going to have you brag a little bit here. There's a lot of environment or educational consultants out there in the world. You've got a platform here. Why should someone hire Jeff Quebec to be their educational consultant?
Yeah, well, thanks. So I think first and foremost, I've been working in independent school education since 1994. So whether it be on the teacher side, the coach, the dorm parent, the administrator, and then moved into consultancy. I have advanced degrees, including my doctorate degree. And as I mentioned, my dissertation is on the values and benefits of independent boarding school. And I've worked with students not only from over the country, over the world. Personally, I've traveled to 75 different countries. I got a really good appreciation of students and families that are coming from all walks of life and all parts of the globe. I think that's important. And be quite candid, I think my students do quite well. And they have success. And this is a business that's definitely word of mouth. It's a word of mouth industry where a student or family has a good experience and they're telling someone else. And that's what you want. So you work hard and you're being an advocate for the student. So the student's success then becomes my success because then they're happy, they're proud, and they're saying, wow, it's great working with Jeff. And they're recommending someone, you should check out, contact Jeff Quebec or I'll put you in touch. So and actually my website, if you want to check it out, is quebec-consultant.com.
Yeah, we'll have that in the show notes. Just look below. It will be there if you want to reach out to Jeff and get more information. Going back to what you said about you help with interviews. I've had a situation where a kid went into an interview. He didn't have much money anyway, and he killed it in the interview, did great, and he ended up getting a full ride out of it because the interviewer loved him so much, convinced the financial aid board to give him a full ride. He got it. I've seen other times where the interview didn't go very good or very well, and it hurt the kid. You have been in those rooms doing interviews as a former admission director. Tell me how important the interview process is, and are there any tips you can offer?
Yeah, so I think it's huge. I think it's an underestimated part of the process, especially more so maybe by the parents, because they may look at their child's accomplishments, whether in this case you're talking about basketball, maybe on the court or in the classroom, and they're saying my son's or daughter is really talented and it's not going to be a problem. They check all these boxes and they don't interview well. So it's just like in life. We all make first impressions when you meet someone, whether it be at the grocery store aisle or, you name your place. And so I think it is really important. But on the flip side, I do think you can be sort of over-prepared and almost like programmed like robotic, where you're not yourself. So the advice I would give is first and foremost, I think there is some preparation and go into it. I think you have to be yourself. You got to be genuine. And that's what the schools want. And so the best interviews, while they're going to ask you questions, the best interviews are the ones that become more like a conversation. Not being drilled back and forth with questions. So I think one of the things I would share with someone as an advice is that when admissions officers ask you a question, ideally the answers aren't going to be one-word answers. Yep, nope, or just some simple answer, but expand upon it. For example, if I were to ask you, Corey, what your favorite food is, you might say you really love Italian food. But the best answers are going to be, you're going to then expand maybe what you like in Italian food or what type of dishes you like or why you like Italian food. Similar if you're talking about an academic subject in school, et cetera. So be able to expand upon your words. It shows a little more depth.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, sir, no, sir doesn't hurt either. Ask them questions, the interviewer questions. I think that's good too. When kids take visits, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add in regards to the question is, so at the end of the interview, most of the time, the admissions officer is going to ask you, do you have any questions? Now, in your mind, you might have had, say you had 2 or 3 really good questions that you were going to ask. And so then you're thinking, okay, well, during the interview, that person already answered those questions. Now I have none. So keep that in mind because it's probably not a good look at the end. They said, nope, I'm all set. Because while in your mind, they already answered your questions and you're right, it may also be perceived as though, the student's really not interested. They're just looking to get out of here. They're not interested in our school. So I would say in your mind, have a good quantity of questions that are banked. You don't have to ask them all, but definitely have some backups in case those ones that you were prepared to ask have already been answered.
Yeah, love it.
And also,
go ahead. Sorry.
It's also, I think it's okay to ask, say, a tour guide a question and maybe ask the admissions officer from the adult perspective the same exact question. That's okay.
Great. Yeah, good tips right there. What about on these visits? Is there do's and don'ts for what to wear?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I don't think you can overdress to an extent, but I do think you can underdress. And so what you'll see as you visit campuses, you'll absolutely see a big range as far as the dress codes at these campuses. And so you can always ask and reach out to the admissions office and ask them, what is appropriate. But I personally don't, I think if you wear just a nice, decent pair of pants, I wouldn't wear blue jeans, for example. And then I think a pair of shoes and wear a belt, like a collared shirt. If you can wear a tie, that would be great too. And you, for a school that doesn't have a formal dress code, maybe you don't want to wear a jacket. But I certainly think that you don't want to be going there with your sneakers and your running pants and hoodie.
Yeah.
Even though that may be acceptable at your current school.
Yeah. First impressions. How has the prep school world changed since COVID? Better or worse?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think a couple things happened. One is certainly probably similar to many of the college universities. I think some of the independent schools, or all of them, really suffered with the international market. And that was something that was out of anyone's control, especially with the closing of some of the visa offices in their home countries. And some schools maybe were better prepared than others. And what I may mean by that is some of them maybe were more diverse as far as where their students were coming from and not maybe relied on certain markets. And so I think that made a big difference. I think we've turned the corner on that now. And the conversations I've had with schools is that I have not heard from a single independent school that had any issues this summer in regards to students coming over internationally. So that was great. And so students were able to arrive, but they didn't know entering the summer what's going to happen. And so it seems like it's gone really well there. I think that's one of the changes. I think when we look back on it, we're going to find areas we're going to say that, believe it or not, as much as we all disliked COVID, what we had to go through, but there were some positive changes there. So there were schools that definitely were forced to make some internal changes. In some cases, they stuck with them because, like, you know what, this actually works. This is actually better. So I think there were some areas there that, and those were depending from school to school, just individual areas. I think that was good. What else? I think that admissions offices specifically understood the importance more so of, like, we really need to diversify where our kids are coming from and not maybe rely on the international market as much. God forbid if something happens again, we have something similar to COVID. That's a real challenge.
Yeah. And I think some of the things I saw, I think more schools now are doing rolling admissions to where if they see a student they like, if the money works, they'll take them sooner than March 10th. I think that's progressive thinking. More schools are not requiring kids to play multiple sports, right? Some kids want to go to a school to play that specific sport. And I get the pros and cons of playing multiple sports, but I also see my clients don't want to play soccer if they're leaving their mom and dad to go across the country to play the sport they love, basketball. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
from an admission standpoint, I agree with you on that. Definitely some schools have gone to rolling. Others have gone to an early or sort of like an early decision, almost the model they have at college universities. And I know there are schools in discussions that are thinking about that behind the scenes, what that may or may not look like. In regards to playing the multiple sports, I think a couple of things. One is I think certainly there's some benefits of students not being one-dimensional. I do understand that from a society standpoint, we're more into specialization. And there's a lot of pressure. So if you play at an elite level, say in a sport, there's pressure from that coach to really focus and concentrate on that one sport. So I think there's pros and cons to that. I do believe in the model, and I think it's nice when kids can play other sports and get involved. And I think it's also really interesting when you see athletes might be really, really talented in one sport, like definitely accomplished, have an ability to go to the next level, and they're humble enough and okay to play another sport, maybe at a really low level. And I do think that their top sport, they gain from that experience. Instead of being the starter, maybe they're more riding the pine a little more on the bench. And I think it changes them as an athlete for the better. So I've seen some really positive examples of that. Or maybe they're a little more of a cheerleader.
Yeah, no, I've seen that in all, because there's a lot of our kids that have to play multiple sports, and it's humbling. You're right. You're right. Help me with this. This is something I've never understood. It's the March 10th date, right? Where did that come from, and why are schools still sticking to that versus each individual school doing what they want to do whenever they want to do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I couldn't tell you the exact history of it. It was interesting. I was on a campus a couple of weeks ago, and a sort of a longtime director of admissions brought that up, and he said the same thing. He goes, back in the day, it was sort of arbitrarily made, and schools have just kind of stuck to it, and been respectful about that. But now, like as I mentioned, there are some schools that are either doing a rolling admissions or starting to do an early decision. So I think you're going to start seeing some more changes to the landscape of that.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'll have a client, and I'll have two schools he's applied to and loves. One's given a decision in 1 week, and one we got to wait 6 months till March 10th. And it's hard to wait till March 10th and not knowing what that answer is going to be when you can sign 6 months earlier and be locked up before your senior season. So
yeah, very much.
And the coaches are frustrated too. But since COVID, so much has changed with certain requirements, with certain practice dates and all this and that. I'm just curious, like
Yeah.
when the old school prep schools that are more traditional, if they're going to start changing or not. So
It'll be interesting because I think when you take one of those schools and maybe has been around for a couple hundred years, makes that change, it'll almost open the floodgates, I think.
yeah,
Um, the other thing, just to piggyback, I was thinking in regards to changes from COVID is that during times of COVID, standardized testing wasn't really a thing. And the reason was the thing because you couldn't necessarily go take a standardized test. It wasn't really an option. So that changed the dynamics. And what has happened since then is I think there were definitely, I'd call it more highly competitive select schools who maybe had some students that were being accepted and enrolling in their school who maybe otherwise wouldn't have academically. And I think that became a little bit of a challenge. And especially I think some of the veteran teachers saw that, seeing that maybe they weren't prepared in some of the, having some of the foundational areas and subjects. And so I think you've seen more and more schools go back now to requiring standardized testing. I think that's been a big change.
yeah,
Where but
because like
pre-COVID, we were in a sort of a time where I think schools were maybe shifting away from it a little bit more. And now I think we're going in the opposite direction now.
because what you mentioned earlier, an A in one school district is different from an A in maybe this private school in this other part of the country. So yeah, I agree
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
that. What's a misconception that you see over and over again that families have still about prep schools?
In what area? There's plenty of them.
Just let's say just in general. Like I know
Sure.
one thing
Yeah,
I've got
sure.
to fight is prep schools for kids that have discipline problems.
Yeah, totally. So I think you have, there's many categories. Just when you mentioned, I think rich and affluent, famous. Like I mentioned, issues at home on the family front. Let's get this kid out of the house, and I'll be honest with you, from the admission standpoint, and not to say those things maybe didn't exist in different generations, but today in the modern day, for a child applying to different schools, is if there's any sense that that student does not want to be there, you are not getting accepted. It's just too competitive. The applicant pool is so large. So they want students who first and foremost want to be there. Because if you're not going to be there, you're not going to obviously get involved in the community, but you're not going to achieve any level of success. And it's going to be to the detriment of the other students there.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Now here's the one I can't wait to talk to you about. It's
All right.
the perception of academics at prep schools, right? So you've got the 10, right? Exeter, Hotchkiss, Loomis, to name a few. They kind of go around the world together, and they're known they call themselves like the top academic prep schools in the world. And you've got other schools on the East Coast that are very good academics, but they're not in the 10. And then you've got other schools that could be great fits for family, but they don't have the brand name that maybe another school has. So when you've got all these prep schools out there, Jeff, and they all claim they've got great academics, how, if I'm a family that doesn't know how this world works, am I going to get a different education if I'm not at a 10 school versus a 10 school within the 10 schools? Like, how does a family know when they're looking at these swaths of schools, the academic differences between each?
Yeah, it's a great question because I've never heard of a prep school that's going to say we have bad academics, right? Or
Exactly.
So I think honestly, I think you can get a good education in all these schools. Are there differences? Absolutely. But with that said, Corey, I think there is definitely a lot of hidden gems throughout the United States and Canada. And there's some unbelievable schools out there. And so I think it's important to branch out and find what that right fit is. And as you mentioned about sort of that gut instinct, that's important. There's a lot to be said about that. But from an academic standpoint, you can also argue, say you're really, really talented academically. You test one really high percentile, you've got really strong grades, and you've been high achieving throughout your entire academic career. And you're applied to, and you're fortunate enough to be accepted and enroll at one of the more highly competitive select schools, which is great. And they're phenomenal schools. But now things have changed, and you have to start eventually looking ahead towards the college university. So where are you now relative to your peers at that school? You got to keep that in mind. So I think a lot of times academic progress coincides with your confidence level. And so someone may say, I'm really, really good at math. And now all of a sudden you go to a school where there's a lot of students that are really, really good at math from not only over the US, but all over the world. And you might be humbled pretty quick when you find students that maybe are at much higher advanced levels. And you find out maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. And now, because you've lost some of that confidence, that can have an impact on your growth and development, just say in this case, math, versus maybe a school where you continue to grow and progress and you gain that confidence. Maybe there's more leadership opportunities. So everyone's different. It's about finding the right fit. But I certainly think that there are definitely a lot of hidden gems. And some of that does come down to dollars and cents because some schools have bigger budgets for marketing or they've been around longer. They've been around for hundreds of years. So I was speaking with a family today and we talked about a particular school that is not one that's as well known. And I shared with them. I said, I think it's one that might be a good fit for your child. And I explained the reason why. And We finished up the conversation. They want to check out this school because I think I was able to try to convince them, but it wasn't one that was coming up on this family's initial search they'd done on their own. And the most important thing would be for that family and that child to go physically visit the campus. And it's not about, like I said, who's got the pretty pictures on the website or who's got these great taglines. Go check it out. See how you feel.
But, yeah, I agree with you 100% on all that. What do you say to families, though, that ask you about, hey, aren't the academics better at one of these schools that might have the bigger brand names versus one of these hidden gems? Like, who determines? I know what you get about them. I know what you just said about the math, but is there a neutral body that determines this school is higher ranked academically than this one? Do colleges think this? Is there a survey out there that ranks these academically?
Well, yeah, first of all, I would be really careful of any survey. Obviously we know what happens at the college level, and to some extent it's starting to happen now at these younger levels at the prep school level. But I'd be really cautious of that because we've all seen these surveys and we looked at them and be like, oh, wow. And some things are just out of control, or there's things that are false. Maybe there's a single gender school and they have it labeled as co-ed, or the enrollment they have labeled as 500 and it's really 750. And so I think sometimes, unlike maybe the U.S. News and World Report that is very well known for college universities, I've seen some of the data and it's not accurate. So how are you evaluating the school in the survey if the information you have isn't accurate? Because the school didn't necessarily participate. They didn't necessarily contribute that information. So that's unfortunate, but I get it. Some, depending on your background, some people are really big into those rankings, so they can have an impact. And no doubt about it, schools that or maybe have a larger enrollment of students or possibly have a larger endowment, they may have some offerings other schools can't have. Maybe because they don't have the number of kids to support a certain class. So that certainly can happen. That can be realistic. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think I've seen one of these schools where you're going to walk away and say, oh, you're going to get a terrible education there. I'm speaking specifically in the classroom. But then certainly, as you know, with basketball, a lot's going to become on the extracurricular. So in a recent study I saw, the number one reason why a student or family chooses a school is academics. And the number two reason is athletics. And then I believe visual performing arts, I think were either 4 or 5, they're further down. So when you combined those extra programs, whether it be, say, the arts and athletics, you combine the two, it's the number one reason why students are looking at a school, because it's not uncommon too. You might have a student or a family who says, we can get a great education here in our local school. But what we can't get, in this case of, speaking about prep athletics and your prep athletics podcast and basketball, the basketball is not where we need it or want it to be. And that's one of the reasons we're looking. And there's nothing wrong with that. Similar to the story I shared with my brother, moving on to Deerfield Academy, hockey was the driving force there.
Right.
And that's okay.
And Jeff, we need to let families know too, if you're at one of these top end schools trying to get to a high academic school, the competition is going to be much more tight among you and your classmates trying to get those couple Ivy League spots at Harvard or Dartmouth, because these schools can only submit so many kids per class, where if you go to a school that maybe falls outside, and we'll call it one of those hidden gems you just mentioned, you might have less people applying to those high academic colleges and you might stand a better chance getting in. Is that the case?
I mean, I guess it could be true, but on the flip side, you can argue for either one of those schools is that a lot's going to be the reputation on the students who have come before you. So whether it's a more selective school or a less selective school, if a college university has had great success in those students who've graduated from that school, they're more likely to want to accept more students. So I think that's the bigger part, is the students have come before you, like, because they know the school, like, wow, students from that school, like, they're really well prepared. And I think that is on any end of the spectrum. So I think once again, it comes down to the right fit, because there's highly selective schools that are phenomenal, there's less selective schools that are phenomenal. But I think, often sometimes they're less known. And a lot of times it does come down to dollars and cents and the budget and the marketing and what they've done for exposure, or they haven't been around as long. They haven't had that opportunity.
Yeah. Some families have come to me and say, hey, we want to go Ivy League. These are the 5 prep schools that have sent the most kid to Ivy League. And I say, that's great. Once again, I go back to right fit, just like, you are on the same page with. But there was a school in the Ivy League that took a kid from Putnam Science. Now, he qualified to get in that school, but Putnam Science is not known as a high academic institution. In fact, they're probably on the other end to where they help a lot of kids get NCAA eligible. And then a pop-up basketball academy in Arizona sent a kid to Harvard.
Sure.
Right. So to me, what I tell families is, if Harvard or one of these Ivy League or high academic schools wants you and you qualify to get in, they don't care what school you come from. Yeah, they'd love you to come from a school that they know you're getting trained on the court the right way and you're doing good in the classroom. But if you look at any Ivy League roster, you're going to have international kids, prep school kids, public school kids, private school kids, if they want you, they don't really care what the jersey is. Now, relationships don't matter, but Putnam Science and that pop-up in Arizona kind of proved my point that they'll take you from wherever if you can get in.
Well, the best thing is, Corey, is whether you attend a school in Arizona or in Connecticut, these schools, these independent boarding schools are going to do a great job of working with you to help you reach your highest level of potential, both in the classroom and in this case on the court. And so at the end of the day, it's also what you make of it, right? You're being given this opportunity. So what do you make of that opportunity? But on the flip side, when you mentioned Ivy League, let's be honest, everyone's not cut out to go to Ivy Leagues. And so you got to also be realistic with your goals. So you might have someone who's a young 8th grader and the child and the parents saying, I want to go Ivy League. It's great to have those goals and aspirations, but you're looking at their background, their experience. Maybe they have some different learning challenges. And not to say you can't overcome them, because of course you can, but you also have to be realistic. So I believe in reaching for goals, but you also have to be realistic with your goals too. Or make sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So if you had a student who came to you academically and said, well, I'm only going to apply to 2 colleges, I'm going to apply only to Harvard, only MIT, that's probably not a smart decision. And even if you are valedictorian of your class and you've got all these different accomplishments, because there's a lot of kids that fall in those categories who apply to those schools. And I think similarly to the prep schools, you got to be smart about that when you're exploring what schools you're going to apply to. And you can have reach schools. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. All right, last thing, I'm going to beat this horse one more time. If you have 2 prep schools side by side, how is a family or a consultant going to know which one is better academically? Take out the fit, like just better academically. Is it how long a teacher's been on campus? Is it how many different colleges kids have matriculated to? What do you say to
Well,
that?
I think there's a lot of factors. So if you're looking to go to the next level, to prepare for the next level, I think to see where those students have gone afterward, I think is important. And what I like to look at matriculation lists is I always find it funny when I see a school that might say, these where our students have been accepted in the last 10 years. 10 years. Well, 10 years is that's a pretty good span, 10 years, right? And just because they're accepted, where they, and some schools will break it down. These are the ones that accepted. These are the ones that have enrolled. But I don't see no reason why a school should be saying this is where our class went last year or the year before. Like break it down per year. But when you have a gapping of 10 years, especially when you're dealing with COVID, like that's a pretty big span.
I see.
So I think to me, that's a little bit of a red flag there. I think there's other things. I mean, I think certainly I was having a conversation with someone about this today. I do believe that facilities make a difference. And also the facilities you have, but upkeep of facilities, what does it look like? Once again, just like that first impression you make when you meet another person for the first time. What's your impression when you walk on campus? Does it look run down? Does it look like they're maintaining it? Right? You're gonna not only be a student there, you're gonna live there. You're gonna live in the dorms. What are the dormitories like? You got to be happy. If you're not happy in the dorm, you're not going to achieve in the classroom. You're not going to achieve on the court. So I think being happy is really important. What's the turnover like? Is there a high level of turnover among faculty and staff? I think that's a big one.
Is there a way to find that out, Jeff?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. So today I was on looking at a school, and I was flipping through one of the coaches, and I looked at like the last 4 years. They've had four different head coaches in 4 years. I think if you're a student athlete for that particular sport, you kind of wonder, well, what's going on there, right? And there could be legit reason, but I think it could be their own professional development moving on. But there's also a different level of consistency. I would also argue, specifically because you work with basketball players, for any student athlete, is keep in mind is that you may be feeling the love, as we all like to feel when you're being recruited as a student athlete by a coach, and you're looking to arrive as, say, a freshman or sophomore. That coach may not be there. That's the reality of it. And so you've got to make sure that you're happy there, first and foremost, as a person, as a student, and not make it all 100% about the coach. Yeah, sure, the coach is important. It's a big part of the recruiting process, but it's got to be that you're happy at the school. And they always talk about like the broken leg, syndrome, right? You break your leg. Are you going to be happy there still? Because you can't play basketball. You got a broken leg, or you blew out your knee or something, and you're in rehab. So that's really important. And it can't be just because of coach so-and-so you really love. And while that's understandably a big part of the process, and so it should be, you just have to keep that in mind. Would it still be a school, and in this case, a basketball player, you'd be happy with if the coach moved on or something happened?
In the basketball side, I don't know how it is on hockey, but a lot of these coaches never want to leave because prep school jobs they're great. Right. A lot of them have been to college level. They see what the stress is. They love creating their own thing at the prep school world. But when a coach leaves, it's usually because the administration is not behind them.
Yeah.
Right. And you've got some schools where the administration gets behind the basketball team. It's thriving. Team does well. People know about it nationwide. So that's one thing I tell clients to look at too, is how long has that coach been there?
Or there's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity for development, right? An opportunity for them to maybe move to the collegiate ranks or something they've always aspired to.
that doesn't happen as often because of the grind that the college rank is now, with NIL, with the transfer portals. So yeah, these guys are getting smart. In fact, I've got a whole list of coaches that are like, let me know when a prep school spot opens up. We would love to have our name in that mix, because these are such coveted spots, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. When a coach leaves, does the administration support that? Why is that coach leaving? So that's where, you and I provide values. We usually know the answers to this stuff.
Or
but
it could
let me
be
ask you-
financial. It could be from a budget standpoint where they're allocating their funds in different areas. And there could be some frustration because the school has made a decision that they feel it's more important to put funds towards another program or a different area in the school.
And we have seen that too. No names mentioned, but yeah, we have seen that too. So, what's a mistake families make, Jeff, when they're applying to prep schools?
I think first and foremost, I think you want to make sure that whether you're working with a consultant or not working with a consultant, that it comes across that it's student driven and not parent, coach, agent, advisor driven. I think that's really important. And while you're certainly getting advice from different people, I think it's important that the school sees that, okay, this is not the over the top parent in the stands who's going to let the school know how great the child is. And I think that also can come across loud and clear sometimes during the interview process where you don't necessarily know who you're interviewing with. And while that person may be a really important part of the admissions team and part of the admissions committee, in this case about basketball, they may not care less about basketball. Like that's not their jam. And all of a sudden they're sitting there. And while the basketball coach is going to love maybe to hear the brag sheet and all the stuff about basketball, this man or woman may be like, oh my God, this parent is over the top. While I love the student, do we really want to have this parent involved? So that can be a red flag.
Interesting. Okay. We talk about that in the basketball side too. Those dads, right? Those unrealistic dads.
Well, mothers too. It goes both ways, right?
It does. It does. Parents, I should say parents, right? If a family is torn between two great options and they're one of your clients, how do you advise the player, the athlete, the student to choose between these two? Like, what are your suggestions when dealing with that?
I think the second visit is absolutely essential.
Okay.
I just think that you're naturally going to be more relaxed. You're more relaxed and you're going through that process. And now you're visualizing yourself. Can I see myself here? Versus when you first maybe were on campus, there's a little more level of anxiety. Maybe you came back to watch a basketball game, but you still haven't heard the decision. So you're nervous. Understandably, you're putting your best foot forward and trying to impress, but you're approaching at a different level when you have that acceptance letter. So the second visit is just critical. And also, I think it's important. I always tell students and parents, ask what I refer to as the tough questions. And in the course of athletics, that may be playing time. Now, I don't think that should be your first question. The first question should be, where do I fit here? What's my playing time? But I do think that it's important because obviously it's something that you're passionate about. So do you want to go to a school where maybe there's not an opportunity? You play a position where the coach says, I've got a tremendous amount of depth. There's an opportunity for you here, but you're not going to play that position. If that person's so adamant, they're not willing to be flexible, that's a problem. You're probably not going to be a good fit there. So that's maybe what I call one of those tougher questions. But don't be afraid to ask those questions because then at the end of the day, you can know that internally, no matter what happens, that you asked that and you found out the answer. Because you certainly shouldn't arrive to a campus and have those things in your back of mind. I wonder, or I'm not sure. And maybe the coach isn't going to share with you or not be as upfront. That's fair, but at least you've asked the question. So then you can make that evaluation as you're maybe comparing these two schools like you mentioned.
I love it. I love it. Now, here's one I get. Hey, I want to get a scholarship at a prep school to play basketball. And then I have to break down about, need-based aid, merit-based aid. What do you tell families that when they start asking you, how much does prep school cost? Give me your spiel on how you explain that to them with aid versus need, et cetera.
Yeah, great. Well, let's be honest. From a need standpoint, we all would love to have more money, and it's great. Who wouldn't want to go to any one of these schools and pay little to next to nothing, or pay nothing? But you mentioned earlier about playing the two sports, and that's where sometimes that comes into play. So, how many boxes do you check, right? Because if a school has a allocation of funds for financial aid, they've got students from all over the U.S., all over the globe, wherever, all walks of life, and they're trying to put together really special classes for their school. And it's not just, in this case, just basketball. They're getting it from all different areas. Maybe they have a really accomplished band. And the band director who's been there 25 years says, we're graduating 4 of our trumpet players, and we really have to have a trumpet player or 2. That's important. The school values the teacher's been there for 25 years. The band's really successful. So the point is that they're trying to take those funds and maybe, I don't know, spread them as thin as possible, but basically really be smart in the allocation of where that money goes and not just necessarily in one program. And that does vary from school to school, where maybe an emphasis would be of how they're trying to allocate that. So from the parental standpoint, I think a couple things. One is there apps. If you're a family who legitimately does qualify for financial aid, there is absolutely a sacrifice that you're going to need to make. So you do the paperwork, you go through, and it comes back and it says that as a family, you can afford X amount of dollars. And so you may not get X. You may get 80% of that, maybe 70% of that. And that's the reality of it. But on the flip side, I know there's also expenses that go into feeding your child back home, of your different tournament entry fees and hotels or gas or travel or meals on the road at a restaurant and such. So there's expenses that go along with that. And so you've got to really take that, be honest with yourself in that. And also they're looking for that sacrifice and that commitment that you're really interested. And so I think often you hear stories that people, maybe I'll call it, going back to the parents, might be sort of some bragging that goes on in the stands of what a family is or isn't paying. And it may or may not be true. And even if it is true, the reality is you probably truly don't know their financial or their personal situation, because everyone is different. So be careful that it doesn't come down to what someone's sharing with you, sort of the free basketball advice when it comes to financial aid.
Now, you were head of admission, or you were in the admission department at Cushing, McDuffie, Katz Academy. And to me, one of the most difficult jobs in the educational world is being in the admission department, because you know how many beds need to be filled in every class. You know what your financial aid pot is each year, and you've got to divvy that up. So take me behind the scenes and what those conversations are like. So you've got your pool, you've got your applicants, you've got coaches have their rankings. Where do you guys begin? And I know that's a whole books have been written.
Yeah,
on
it's a great question. So I would say a couple of things. One is I think you look at the different, certainly for the students when it comes to financial aid, at that point, generally speaking, I'm speaking on generalizations here, the school has already made the decision that they want the child, right? This is a boy or girl we'd want at our school. So in the perfect scenario, they'd love to have all of them. But unfortunately, there also is operating costs and there's bills to be paid, and just it's not realistic, or else everyone would come to these schools for free. So then with that, you've got funds. So traditionally for a lot of schools over the years, there was an idea that you would have, not an idea, there was a sort of a pool of money you would have. You have X amount of dollars to spend for financial aid. And so what's happening now in a lot of schools is they work off what's called the net tuition revenue. So it's a little different model. And so with the net tuition revenue, it sort of works the opposite direction. What I mean by that, instead of having a pool of X amount of dollars and you're deducting every time someone's allocated financial aid, you're sort of working from the ground up. And so you have a budget. You have a budget of what you need to basically acquire in order to be successful, to have the school operate with the programs and pay the salaries and pay the bills, et cetera. And you're working in the opposite direction. And so it's the idea that you're starting at ground zero and you're building a class. You're building up to be able to meet that number. And then with that, you're going to have, from an admission standpoint, you're going to have different program heads, and that could be anything from the dance teacher to the baseball coach to the head of the robotics program, who's going to come forward and is going to say, in this case, maybe I have this boy or this girl who's really good. I think they'll add to our school, and they're going to essentially go to bat for why they think there'd be a great addition. And I'm speaking specifically on the students the admissions already decided they want the child, but it's from a financial aid standpoint. And from an admissions to financial aid committee, it's more attractive when let's say in this case, the young man that the basketball coach really, really wants, the robotics head is saying that this boy has experience in robotics and is really interested to continue it. I want him too. Or maybe the ceramics teacher, all different categories. Or the baseball coach is saying that this is also a southpaw. We had a lefty pitcher here, and he also plays first base. And he's good. I've seen his film. I've watched him play. And so now, from the admissions and financial aid standpoint, we're saying, well, we know we already want him. He's already acceptable, but now we really feel, okay, that this student is going to contribute in many facets of life, not just on, the baseball diamond or the basketball court, whatever it may be. And so you're more likely then to be in a position to maybe meet their needs or award them financial aid. So there are situations, unfortunately, and this is a dilemma that a lot of schools deal with, is that you can have a situation where admissions is saying he or she is fully acceptable, no problem, but we can't make ends meet financially. So do we lowball them? Do we give them zero financial aid? Do we waitlist them? And that's a tricky one, because let's be honest, what your family may or may not need financially really is out of your control as a young adolescent boy or girl. And if you've done everything possible, as far as academically, athletically, extracurricular, some schools have the philosophy that they'll say, congratulations, you've been accepted. And maybe, unfortunately, you're put on a financial aid wait list, or unfortunately, we can't give you any financial aid. Other schools have the philosophy that that's bad, especially if there's no chance of ever getting any funds. And they maybe just will waitlist you or reject you. And that becomes an individual school philosophy. And that gets tricky. And there's usually some debate behind that because that's hard. And you're tugging with emotions, the emotion of the child, the emotion of the parents. That's not always easy. So it's a little bit of a game, but it's not easy and it's hard. And then with that, you mentioned that you have students, understandably, who are getting accepted to multiple schools. And so your school may not be that child's first choice.
Right.
So I have seen some pressure that maybe has become a little more common where schools are trying to find out, where are we in the pecking order? Are we your first choice, second choice? Like, where do we fit? And while it's a challenge, but I do understand, especially schools that maybe don't have as large of a financial aid budget. If you're the child's fifth choice, they can't risk allocating funds to you because you're going to lose out on someone else who possibly your school is their first choice. So I think for some of the smaller schools, it becomes a little more of a challenge.
Yeah, and some of the other schools, they want to find out where you're on the pecking order so they can have their acceptance rate percentage be higher. Right.
100%.
And
Yeah,
that's tricky too.
you're absolutely right on that, especially the more competitive schools who are doing that. You're absolutely right. I had a gentleman who's a veteran admissions officer last year, and he reached out to one of my students, and I always coach the parents and the families, and I'm going to say whatever you ask me to say in regards to that topic. And I sort of go over the pros and cons of when you may want to have a first or second choice, when you may not want to have one, et cetera. And this boy truly did not have a first choice, but this particular school arguably was in the top 3. And I started to share that with this veteran admissions officer. And I said, I'll be honest with you, I think you're in his top 3. And I think he's got some good choices, but he's going to do revisits. He's not really sure, assuming he can get accepted. And he sort of interrupted me and said, that's it. That's all I need to hear. And he says, Jeff, it is now our job to yield him. And for me, that was so refreshing to hear that.
Right.
So yes, he wanted to know, but I wasn't getting the full court press. And to me, that was awesome. So he did his due diligence. He reached out to me and asked, and I was very honest with him. But I just like that approach. And every school, understandably, can't always do that. But it was nice to hear that.
Yeah, that was a mature way of handling it. So
it was awesome. Yeah, it was really good.
Tell me this: when a kid gets waitlisted, what do you tell families in that situation?
Yeah, waitlists are tough. And so I think one of the things is when I work if I have a student who gets waitlisted, certainly it's a little bit different because I can have conversations behind the scene. But the advice that I would give a student or family is to realize that when you receive that waitlist, you may not be happy. Nothing is going to change in those first couple of days, even first couple of weeks. It's just the reality that it's happening. It's just not going to happen. And so the anxious student or parent who immediately reaches out an email or phone call, they want to call back, and the questions often are going to be, A, where on the wait list am I, right, as far as that ranking? And the real truth of the matter is these schools do not put together behind the scenes a list. They don't have your number 1 the wait list, your number 2, number 3. They just don't do that. There's a pool. Now, certainly they have ones they'd like more than others, but they're not putting a number associated with it. Or am I going to get off the wait list? It's just too early because at that point, and you've received that letter on March 10th, they need to find out what their yield is, meaning that among the students they've accepted, who's going to accept them? Like we said earlier with the financial aid, is they're going to lose some students because they chose other schools. And schools realize that, hence why if they had to fill 10 beds, they're not only accepting 10 students. They know their numbers. They know their trends. And so maybe they're accepting 15 or whatever the number may be. And so as the process goes on, and sometimes that's going to take a month because while someone may get accepted on March 10th and immediately say, yeah, I'm in, I'm going there, others are going to wait. They're going to do a second visit. They're going to get a little closer to that April 10th deadline. April 10th deadline. And then the school may not know their status of their wait list until post April 10th. And that's tough for students and families because waiting a month is long, especially when you didn't get the news you wanted to receive.
I know. And then will schools tell a kid if they're number 1 on the wait list, will they kind of share them like, hey, you're right there. We just didn't have numbers for you. Will they share that with a student if they're number 1, like right there? Or do they keep that pretty quiet?
I do think if they felt that you were really high in the wait list and were really high odds, but I just think that's pretty rare, or else they would have accepted you, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. You've got a podcast. Tell us about it.
I do. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking. So my podcast is Why Boarding School, and it's right now an audience is in 60. I have audience in 62 different countries, and so I've got close to 100 episodes, and you can find it at my website whyboardingschool.com. So my other website, as I mentioned, is Quebec-consulting.com. So if you go to the whyboardingschool.com website, or you go to wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, whether it be Apple or Spotify or through YouTube, and check out Why Boarding School Podcast. And what it is interviews with heads of admissions or heads of school or people basically on high leadership positions of the school who really talk about the school. And so it's not about me, it's not about them personally, but it's about the school. And we do a deep dive, asking questions and learning more about the school from not only academics, but athletics, et cetera. And so I think for those who might be interested in looking or exploring independent schools, it's certainly informative as you can learn more about the school through the Why Boarding School podcast. Who's your friend there? Who do you got there?
Yeah, our puppy Banana. She's been with us 3 weeks now, and she just my
That's
wife
awesome.
finished her job, and now she's up here. So
Nice, very nice.
I mean, it's about time for us to wrap up. But is there? We talked about a lot today, Jeff, and I know you know this world inside and out. Is there any topic or anything we didn't touch on you think our audience should know or be aware of?
No, I think this is great, Corey. I've enjoyed the conversation. And I think the work that you do to help student athletes, specifically basketball players, explore the options of different independent schools is awesome. And I think it's a service that is, we just need more good people. And I think one of the things I know you do and I do is to go out and visit the campuses and visit the schools.
Yeah.
That's what's most important, is to physically get on there and check it out. And that's where you learn get that gut instinct. And if there is anyone who's interested in learning more about my consultant services, certainly feel free to reach out. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We will definitely let people know that want to go that angle about you, Jeff. And hey, you're doing a great job out there. You've been doing this with hockey families for over 30 years now. You've been behind the scenes in the admission department, both at junior prep schools, regular boarding schools, and now helping families. So you're just a great resource. And I suggest folks that are out there that want to learn more about the intricacies of this beyond just sports, check out what Jeff has to say. And it's really informational. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. My pleasure, Corey. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining today. If you'd like this, be sure to subscribe on all the major podcasting platforms and go to YouTube to our channel there to subscribe to get bonus content. And if any questions come up about the prep school world, feel free to email us at Corey@prepathletics.com. All that's at prepathletics.com, including free assessments where we can find out if you're a good candidate for this world. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.